All right, let's move on to our next topic. We're going to talk about personal evangelism, having a personal evangelism strategy, personally as campus ministers, but also as we lead our students through that. Adam, why don't you start us? Will you kind of distinguish when we talk about personal evangelism? What does that mean?
Yeah. So personal evangelism, like very simply, is opportunities and things that you're doing that allow you to actually share Jesus, like meaning that you go into the opportunity of it with the mindset that I'm going to try to walk through the gospel story in a particular way. Because I shared the three buckets, and I think early in ministry, when I was more on the church side of things, more so than like campus evangelism, missionary side, um, ministry recruitment and event promotion, I would almost call personal evangelism. And I don't mean anything negative by this, but they're not like they're not the same. It's not bad to do those things. Like you need to do those things, but that's not evangelism. And the more that I've I think personally wrestled through that and God's convicted me of it and kind of worked towards like a healthy solution in my own personal life, spiritual life, that has transformed and helped a lot of my ministry life, which is like one of the biggest things I think initially, like why is it important that a campus minister or a college minister or any church staff really to have regular rhythms of evangelism? Is because modeling. Like your students and your people in any congregation, they model what the leader does. And I'll say this, like I am not a gifted evangelist. Like there are some people that and the reason why I know that is because I know people that are. And man, they can make the turn. It's like everybody comes to faith when they talk because they're so charismatic and like they're great at explaining the story. And man, sometimes I've shared the gospel. I'm like, man, I think I like did worse for that person's faith. You know what I mean? Or like understanding of Jesus. But I'll say this, I'm not very good at it, but I'm super committed to doing it. So much so, like over the years of doing it, like I kind of have like, for whatever reason, the ratio that God has given me is like one out of every 20 conversations that I have that are specifically evangelistic, I see somebody come to faith. I wish it was higher. I'm glad it's not worse, but that's what it is. Does that make sense? But that's how like committed I am to it. So in my personal rhythms of sharing the gospel with people, like, so my specific goal is 5 to 10 gospel like shares throughout a week. So in a semester of 13 to 15 weeks, I want to get close to 120 to 150 individual share, like you can call them gospel appointments. Sometimes people really get very focused in on like, is that a lunch or a coffee or something like that? Like you can have a gospel appointment really, and it just be you walking somebody to class or like standing out on campus talking to somebody. But sometimes gospel appointments, the way I train students is a very formal thing. So I try to do that personally. And then when it comes to students, student leaders, the personal evangelism side, I try to create at least a couple of those. We try to train them, try to coach them, we try to mobilize them, and we try to celebrate those
Hmm.
specific four things. So with training, a couple of things that have been pieces of advice have been really helpful. One of them is from Gary Stidham, who's in Texas. Gary would always say, just use one tool for evangelism. And I have personally found that to be true. When you train people in all kinds of different tools all the time, with evangelism, it's very confusing. And even though the tools are all similar, man, it's really good if you can just hone in on one tool, so much so that you talk about the strengths of it and can guide students towards those strengths. And then you start to figure out where the blind spots are with that tool, and you can coach students through when they hit those blind spots. So one of the blind spots, so the tool that we primarily use in helping students share the gospel is the three circles. It's very simple, but the blind spot to three circles is that is a content driven tool, meaning that what three circles does is it helps you navigate the contents of how to share the gospel, but it doesn't help you navigate the conversation. So it's great for content. not great for conversation. So I developed a tool. There's like 1,000 tools that help you do this, but it's just how to, from the time that you meet somebody, even how to engage in that conversation to closing the conversation out in a way that helps you to know what's going on with that person. How do you navigate that conversation? So I created a tool. It's called Start It, but really the goal is it just like helps you like have a specific conversation, how to know how much time you need for the conversation, how to like shift a conversation from like talking about random things or fun things to like the contents of the gospel, how to navigate specific like hurdles within sharing the gospel. Like sometimes we talk too much and we don't listen, or sometimes we don't ask the right questions. Um, Very simply, this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but or just like an off track. Sometimes we ask the wrong questions when we're sharing the gospel. We'll ask them questions like, "Hey, do you go to church anywhere?" Or "What do you think about church?" Or "Do you know anybody religious?" And those aren't bad questions. I'm sure they're fine to some degree to get into. If you ask bad questions, you don't get good answers. So, like the question that I train all of my students to ask to transition to a gospel conversation is, "Hey, do you mind if I ask you a question? What do you think about Jesus?" Like, and that gets me into the conversation that I want to have. And then how to close that conversation down by asking questions too. So that's how we do. When it comes to coaching them, um, not too much, but we do on leaders specifically. We do applications and interviews, and we do exit interviews at the beginning and end of each semester. And it kind of helps track us through. So when it comes to evangelism, we help them set personal goals in evangelism. And then when it comes to coaching, we try to create modeling opportunities. So we have a modeling opportunity usually once a month where we do evangelistic surveys. We have other modeling opportunities with gospel appointments. So when we're following up with people from services, often, I mean, more often than not, it's me and a student or one of our staff and a student doing a gospel appointment. And once a student's pretty comfortable with it, they'll go do them by themselves and they don't need us, which is even better. But sometimes they're kind of nervous about it in the beginning. We sort of kind of help knock off like the nervousness because it's really easy. Then mobilization is a part of that, like what opportunities we're giving them. And then sometimes back to the first part of it with training or coaching, sometimes I'll look at some of my student leaders and be like, "Hey, we've had all these opportunities for you to engage in specific personal evangelism, and you haven't done any of them." And that doesn't mean that you're not doing evangelism, but are you? Like, you know what I mean? Like, are you doing it? Like, and so we'll do that. And then celebrations, we try to do these at least weekly in our leadership team meeting, but a lot of our celebrations have actually come after Tuesday night. So what I've made a rhythm of is Wednesday morning, as I'm gathering, collecting, and following up with students from our Tuesday night gathering, I'll just share it directly into our leader group me. "Hey, we had X amount of people respond to the gospel last night." And I don't really tell names that much of people that respond, primarily to keep privacy. Like I think there's a level of privacy that you got to maintain with people as they're making decisions. And then letting those students that are making decisions share. And so a part of our evangelism strategy in our large group is we have a student share the gospel, share their testimony every week. And so those are, so training, coaching, mobilization, and celebrations. Those are a few ways that we try to do it. Yeah.
Adam, there's so much to follow up on what you just said.
Yeah.
That's great. One thing I want to say about the celebration, we have a campus in Alabama that uses that they use their large group time. It's one of our one of our campuses with the larger group that meets during the week, and they always have like 5 or 10 minutes before even worship starts in front of all the students that come to celebrate what are some life changes that have happened throughout the week. I don't think they celebrate like good grades on exams, but they celebrate when a student leads a student to the Lord, or a student makes a decision to follow Christ, and the whole group, not just their leaders, hear it and they celebrate it. And I think we replicate what we celebrate, right? And so if that's what we celebrate the most, then that's what our leaders begin to prioritize as BCM. That's great.
I would agree with Adam. I think you hit it. If we're not modeling to students evangelism, we can't expect students to do evangelism. And so if we're not doing it, students aren't going to do it. I think that if we're not celebrating wins, students aren't going to celebrate the wins. I mean, because they're gonna see and do what we are doing, because that's what they see that we value. And so we got to put a high emphasis on and value evangelism. And so I think you're right. We got to model it. And then you also hit one of the points that I do every semester is set goals. If we don't have goals for personally for me, and then have each of our leaders, hey, set goals, that what type of goal do you want to have in evangelism? I do this with my leaders, is like set goals for evangelism, because it sounds kind of hokey at times. I got a goal to go and share Jesus because that's what I'm supposed to do. But if we don't have a goal, we're never going to strive to, it's not going to motivate us. And so if we have 5 that we want to do every week, I mean, and it's Thursday, and you can say, okay, I mean, I've really suffered this week of where are my priorities? And so it's not saying that we haven't been doing good all week. It's just like my priorities for that week is out of whack, is out of shape. And I need to readjust for the next week so that I can get back on track of sharing Jesus. And I think that's just a good reminder for students to say, hey, not every week is going to be perfect, but my goal is to share Jesus with people. And we do what almost exactly what you do, is we just try to get students opportunities to, whether it's on campus, whether it's we train students with 3 circles as well. I'm with you on the content and the relationship, so we help them to bridge that gap. But we also tell students, how can a student be a good student in their classroom? And so if we're called to be an example, let's show an example to our peers. Don't sit in the back of the class. Sit somewhere in the middle so that you have a person in front of you, to the left, to the right, and behind you. Well, you should know 4 people, and pick a class, 4 people that, hey, because those 4 people around you, you may not know, but by the end of that class period, you should know them. And you should pray, so open the door that says, hey, I want to share Jesus with them. Mm-hmm. And make that part of your goal for the semester in that class, of having 4 people from this class that I'm going to have a gospel conversation with. And if they miss a class, say, hey, I saw that you missed a class. Here are the notes that you missed. And share it. Don't say, but just try to be a good student overall. And so we also tell our students, that says, if you're sitting in the back of the class, you're not telling the professor that, hey, I'm going to be a good student. And so sit towards the front. And reach out. And so, but I definitely agree that we've got to model this and training students, helping them, coaching them. I like your 4 areas. I'm going to take those 4 areas and implement those, because at some point that's what we do, but we just may not have words or the steps with it. But is that we do train students. We want to coach, model with them. We want to give them opportunities. And then how do we celebrate? That should be a high thing of when somebody goes from death to life. And so,
yeah. Yeah, we took time to actually figure out how folks came to Christ on our campus. What was the ways? InterVarsity put that book out. I Once Was Lost, a while ago, about the thresholds postmoderns cross, and it triggered an idea. I'm like, so how are people coming to Christ on our campus? And looking at how they actually are. A lot of it is relational. I mean, you can't do it without relationships. And it's kind of interesting. Again, in an urban area in the Northeast, we are a cold climate culture where I see thousands of people a day that are strangers that I can't have conversations with. I can't talk to everybody I see, and it changes our mentalities. So, but we saw most people come into Christ through these long-term engaged relationships. And how do we leverage and train individuals to share in a way that a lot of people are actually coming and receiving Christ in those intacts? Some things we do is, I mean, and this should be simple, but it shocked me when I started asking the question, just making sure everybody in our ministry knows the gospel, and not only knows the gospel in a way that they've received it, knows the gospel in the way that they can succinctly share it. Those are two different levels of knowledge. And quite often in our Christian meetings, we say the gospel a lot, but we do it in a way that people can agree with it and come to faith in it. But we don't necessarily do it in a way that they learn it in a way that they can share it. So trying to get at least all of our student leaders, but also all of our just active members to a point where they know the gospel well enough to be able to share it. And then if we were looking at answering the question, why are you a Christian? What about following Christ is worth it in your life? What is the value of being a Christian in your life? And we use 5 categories, like, has it changed your relationships? Has it changed your lifestyle for the better? Has it changed your purpose? Has it changed where you belong or believe? Has it changed where you belong, or has it changed what you believe? Has the gospel changed your life in these areas? And is there a normal story that you can share in the context of an everyday conversation about how the gospel has changed the way you go about relationships? Like, is there a way that you can tell a story that the gospel has made a difference in your life? And that's kind of where we try to train our students into getting into the gospel conversation. Has, like, when you're talking to your friends, when you're talking in the context of your relationships, is there a way in a story where, like, if you're talking about how you're relating to your family, your girlfriend, the guy on the street, is there a way you can include in that story that you treated that person differently because of what you believe about Jesus's life, death, and resurrection, in the context of just the everyday stories? There are quite a few of our life stories, and I'm an introvert, and I basically have go-to stories. Like, I have pre-practiced, pre-rehearsed stories about my life that people find enjoyable. So I talk about them all the time. And I have well rehearsed them so that they do well in a crowd. This is the mindset of an introvert. Most of our social interactions are pre-programmed and pre-planned. I lean on certain stories. Since I have those stories in my mind, is there a way that the gospel can be present in those stories? I have a go-to story about how my wife and I started dating that revolves around forgiveness. And it had a lot of, it's easy to transition to that, from that relationship story to a story about Jesus. So getting this in the students' heads about how to get into the gospel in normal conversations, in stories about their lives. The thing I do, because, and this was one thing a student challenged me on, they're like, it's your job to share the gospel with students. And you are the authority figure, and it's easy for you to do that. And they just really challenged me that it was easy for me to share the gospel down to students. That was their mindset. So most of the stories I tell about me sharing the gospel are with my peers, are in a place where I'm taking a personal risk with administration, with faculty and staff, with other people my age on campus. I try to highlight personal evangelism for me in my personal life, not just my professional role.
Yeah.
And
That's good.
it's been a interesting transition on that. So those are the things, making sure that every student knows the gospel, making sure every student has an answer for the question why they are a Christian, what is important about it, how has it changed their lives, and then looking at that how and the stories they have about their lives that can help them transition into a gospel conversation. So
That's great. That's great. We could talk about this for a long time. We're going to transition to the large group evangelism strategies, but real quick, I'm going to talk through some notes that I made. One, I love what you said at the very beginning, Adam. Like, I think us doing it, being committed to it, training our students to one-on-one is far more effective than relying on trying to encourage students just to come to some event. So very often we confuse, he said at the very beginning, we confuse our recruitment and large group promotion as evangelism, and that's not. And we have to be committed to creating opportunities to share Jesus with people in some capacity, and that's so great. And so learning how to do that, having good questions to initiate those conversations, things like, what do you think about Jesus? What does being a Christian look like to you? Not assuming that our students who walk into our ministries without much recruitment are already believers. Like, we have to work through that. Not neglecting relationships. Brian, you talked the value of peer-to-peer sharing. I think that's a gift we give our students so very often. Our churches say, hey, evangelism comes in the form of you sharing it with children or with youth. Like, if we could teach people how to do peer-to-peer evangelism, not only will our ministries, but our churches will be dramatically impacted and changed. And so, and of course, Adam, you gave us the train, coach, mobilize, and celebrate kind of almost systems you work your students through as well. That's great.